Hello again, and in this exercise we're going to start looking at the remove feature, and this is going to be one of just a series of different exercises that we're going to do on the remove, starting fairly straightforwardly and then working our way up in complexity. So let's open up our first clip, which is going to be the Bedouins. 0 to 310, frame rate 25, HD, no fields, frame offset, let's do that to 1. And let's give this a good name. Call this version 2. All right, and let's just take a look at this shot here. Now, at some point, most people have to work with stock footage at some point or another. And one of the advantages of working with that is that it gives you access to a whole load of stuff that, otherwise you wouldn't have easy access to. The problem comes in that you can't always completely find exactly what you want here. So, for example, in this shot, I love the fact that we've got the camels here, but I hate the lens flare, and I don't want this little man here as well. So the thing we'd normally have to do here is come in and paint out the features that we didn't want in our compositing app, the bird as well, maybe. Now, what Mocha Pro allows us to do is to automate a lot of this stuff without having to go in and create the different masks and do the sort of background offset and all of that sort of stuff. So before we get into the meat of it, let's actually think about what we would do if we were taking this and doing the composite ourselves. We'll take a look at the lens flare first here, and maybe we'll take a look at the man a little bit later as well. So the first thing I do here is probably track the lens flare here. I would also have to track the background. Then I'd use a mask to cut out this lens flare, and then just sort of probably slip the background around, or draw up a clean plate or a clean frame to patch in that little gap there that we have here. And essentially, that's exactly what Mocha Pro allows us to do, except it's going to automate that for us. So the first thing we need to do is we need to think of this and build it up in layers. So we're going to start with the planes that are furthest away from us first. So in this case, we're going to do the background. Get a nice little plane going on there. And let's give this a name, background track. And then we're going to add another layer. Let's not have Bezier, let's do another X spline. And this is going to be for our flare. Flare track. Okay, so the flare shouldn't be scaling or translating. Oh, sorry, shouldn't be scaling or rotating. So we're just going to leave translation turned on. So if we come to our background here, again, I don't think it's going to be scaling, but we want the rotation on because it will be rotating. So let's just turn the shear off there. And let's just turn the mats on. Turn my flare on here. I'm going to give this another color. And let's just view all mats. And let's give this one here another color there as well. Cool, so we can just see that a little bit easier. And let's track that forwards. Now, the important thing when we're dealing with the remove is that our background track, our background layer, our background shape here fully covers the foreground one. So we've got to make sure that when we come into it and actually make our proper shapes up, that this flare is always going to be tracked properly. I'll turn my mats off there for a second. And let's come to my flare here. Just make sure that's working. Now, the actual track itself isn't, 100% important that we get that, or it isn't important that we get that 100% accurate, because we can always come in here and change this up afterwards. So the important thing for us to do is make sure that we've got our foreground object that we want to remove tracked or covered, and our background is covering that as well. I'm not going to take us actually all that far. Let's take us back to about here. There we go, about 119 frames. Cool. And so that's the track itself there looks pretty good. It's covered quite nicely. So what I'm going to do now is just make sure that this is always covered by our background shape. I think it goes out around about there. So I can come into my background, bring this up now. Just add a couple of keyframes there. I'm going to be quite careful of two things. The one thing I'm going to be careful of is that our background only covers the background. It's not going to take in this camel's leg, for example. Let's turn the brightness up on that so it's easier to see. Yes, we don't take in the camel's leg like we have there, because that could cause us hassles, especially when we get further up. It's not quite covered. This is going to be a nice tight one there. Actually, let's I'm going to make sure that is covered for that particular frame there and on this frame here, because I want to show you what's going to happen if we are not careful. Alright, so now we've got our two objects tracked in. Oops, stop that there. So now we've got our two objects tracked in, and play that back. That works quite well. So let's take a look now at the remove tab here, and let's take a little check up here. And we've got our render action cog turned on our background track. That's wrong. We only want it turned on the flare track because it's the flare that we want to remove. Let's come here. I'm going to turn stabilize on as well, so I'm not chasing this around. So quick look at the UI. So input clip. Yeah, what clip is it that we're taking in? In this case, it's going to be the base Bedouins clip. Clean plates we're going to come back to. Output, where are we going to take it out to? By default, it's going to save it in the results. We could also create a new clip right here if we want to save it to a particular place. So search range. Now let's step back 1 second and just think about how Mocha Pro is going to be working. What it does is it does what we do in the compositor. It takes this mask that we've created, pokes a hole in it, then it searches through the other frames to see if it can find and match any of this background shape in here in other frames that are clean from this shape for it to fill in. So what the search range does is it tells us where we're going to be looking for to try and find elements from to sort of fill all this empty space in. And the first frame and the last frame, we're going to be searching for a particular range only. So if we've got a big chunk at the beginning of the clip where there's no useful data, and we know there's no useful data because the results that we get back are poor, we can then limit that by just turning up or turning down our search range. And the step just asks us, if we're going to be skipping any frames in between. Our step here is 1, which means it's going to be searching through every single frame. And frames before and frames after, well, this just means where is it going to be searching in relation to the CTI here. At the moment, it's going throughout the entire range of the clip. This could take quite a long time to go through and look for. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So that means it's only going to be looking at the 15 frames before and 15 frames after, immediately after where our current frame is. The rest of this stuff we're going to come through as we move along. So let's come up here, hit render. And we can see that it has been able to fill in an amount of this shape, but it's not it's by no means perfect. So I'm going to come up here. You can now see it's looking at my remove Bedouin, so the remove module for the Bedouins clip. Let's come back to our original. So what I want to do now is actually just refine the area and the shape that we're removing, try and make this a little bit smaller. Now remember, of course, we've already tracked this, so what we do here is going to still keep our track. We're not, going to be losing anything in that place. Cool, so let's try and hit remove again. And again, it's managed to remove it, and we've still got a few artifacts there. So let's turn our search range up a little bit. Turned up to 51, and that's removed it really nicely. So I'm happy with that. Let's just render it forwards. And I'm going to turn off the things there. You see it's doing a pretty good job of getting rid of that flare. Okay, we're getting up to some tricky little bits here. And we're starting to see maybe some artifacts coming in. There we go. So let's turn my shape back on here. We've got a couple of little artifacts coming in there. So what I'm going to do here is turn my number of frames before up, number of frames after down. Just try and render that, see if that makes a difference. Render a couple of frames backwards. Just so that results don't pop. So we've got a little bit of a shift in the luminance here. We're going to come back and I'll show you a couple of different methods of dealing with that, but I'm going to show you that in the next section. Okay, so as the flare comes up here a little bit and comes out here, I'm going to start to get a couple of little artifacts happening. So I'm just going to let this render out until the end, and then we can identify what the problems are and how we deal with them. Okay, so we can see it's pretty good right up until around about here, where things start going a little bit awry. So we've got problems with, well, we've got a very visible, not very visible, but a slightly visible line going on here. But in fact, when we look at this in the real view, we actually can't see that very much, but let's push this a bit more so we can see it. And we've got a bit of spillage coming out here. So what can we do with the spillage here? Well, the spillage here, up at this top point here, is all to do with the fact that our shape, our background shape, isn't tall enough. Now, let's make this just taller here and then re-render. Let's remember to render our flare track, and I'm going to make our flare slightly bigger here so we encompass all of the flare that we want to get rid of. Now the problem we've got up here is that it can't find suitable area to fill in here. So let's try that again just by and turning up our frames before and frames after isn't going to work in this particular case. So we've got a couple of choices about what we do here. We can either decide that we're going to leave it for now and deal with it at the compositing stage and do a bit of paint on the individual frames, or we can take a trouble frames out into something like Photoshop or another paint program and create a clean plate from there from which to fill in, and then use that clean plate as the basis for the rest of the renders. So we're going to come to clean plates in the next clip, so I'm going to leave that there for now. But I just want to show you one more thing that happens if we take in a little bit too much, is we can start to get these lovely repeating patterns as it copies some of the background in. So what I've done here is added in a bit too much of the camel's foot here. Hit render on that, and you can now see that not only have we got an extra bit of flare here, we've also got an extra bit of camel foot going on over there. So let's take this back to Bedouin so we can see where we need to come to. When we've got something like this here, we need to be fairly precise about what it is we're actually removing. All right, but for now, let's take a little look back at what we have. Turn my overlays off, and let's just play that back. And that's not too bad, right up until the point where things, start to go a little bit awry up here. About a frame, 100 or something. Things aren't too bad. Well, let's look at our come over here and look at our man here and see what we can do with him. Again, let's turn the gamma back up so we can see the difference a bit easier. Now I want to remove this guy here, so we're going to do the same basic idea. Let's just turn us back to our track. Turn the other tracks here. Now the issue that we have is that some of this guy is on the sort of foreground plane, but most of him is on the background plane here. So what I'm going to try to do is just track the complete background here. It should work out. It should work out fine. So let's come up, X-spline, taking in just the background plane. Don't want to take in this foreground here because that's going to throw off our tracker. Another thing that's going to throw off our tracker is these camels coming in a little bit, but that's fine. Let's call this background 2 track. Okay, and we've got another one coming up here. Make this slightly loose again. And if I was doing this for rotoscoping, I'd obviously break him up into different objects. But because I can play a little bit faster and looser with him here, it's not going to make too big an issue. Again, with the background here, it's just going to be translation, scale, and rotation. 90% pixels used, I can live with that. And the man, well, we want shear turned on. And let's see how we get on here. Turn our stabilize off so we can see what's going on a bit better. There we go, no problems. He's tracking through quite nicely. And I'm going to stop it here because our camel's about to pop his head in. We can do one of two things here. We can either track the camel's head, or we can just come in here and remove or reduce the shape down a little bit here. Maybe expand it out a bit there. And while we're at it, we might as well just sort the man out there a little bit more. Cool. Okay. So we've got our tracks going on. And let's just check to make sure our man stays within our background. He does. Okay, cool. So let's turn turn the tracking off there, and come into our remove again. Make sure the action cog is just turned on the man, and let's take a little look here. So our search range again, let's search just past our regular range from 1 to 147. Frames before, let's take this down, but probably not too low because the man doesn't move that far. So we are going to have to search quite wide to try and find a blank clip. We might need to bring this up later, but that's fine. Let's just click on render and see what's happening there. Turn off the old overlays. Cool, and that's looking pretty good. The only thing we've got here, well, we will need to remove the string here, but what I'm looking at is we've got a couple of little telltale signs here. Let's render out a few frames just so we can see that a bit clearer. But we've got a few telltale signs of our guy being taken out. Actually, that's another interesting point. I could, as my input clip now, because we've already removed our lens flare for most of this, or actually for all of this shot, I can now use my input clip to be remove bedouins, which takes in all of our rendered stuff. And my output, let's make that new, and I'll call this one remove man. So we're actually now going to be outputting a new clip that's just going to be for this guy here. So we can do sort of iterative removes on the same clip, just one after another, by feeding the results of the first remove into the second one. So it means we're not doubling up the work that we've done before. And if we don't like something that we've done, so if we don't like the work we're doing on the remove man here, we can much more easily come back and sort of just take a look at that instead. So let's take a look at this man one more time. So we'll hit render there, and we've got a few telltale signs going on here. So let's take a quick look at what we can do with the illumination models. Now, what the illumination model does is it determines what happens to the pixels that Mocha Pro takes from the other frames. With it turned off, it performs no other calculations. It just sort of brings them in, and the brightness levels remain the same. With the linear turned on, let's do that and just render that out. So with the linear turned on, it fills in the shape here, and then it also compensates for any sort of brightness differences across the entire frame. So if we've got a change in brightness that affects the entire frame, so for example, say we have an exposure change, or the quality of the light changes across the scene, then linear is going to be the best mode for you. Now, what Interpolate does is it looks for local changes within the shape itself. So let's try and render that out. Now, I don't expect to see big differences in here, because actually what's happening with the illumination, or what's happening with the shape here, isn't really going to be fixed by the illumination model. But that looks for local changes within the brightness of the shape itself. So it's a bit better to compensate for those sort of things. But in this case, it's probably made things a bit worse. We do have a smoothing level here, which will just help to even out any artifacts that we see. But for the sake of this, I'm just going to turn this back to none here. So let's have a look at a feature that may help to disguise what's going on here, and that's going to come under dissolve. So we've got two different ways of doing a dissolve. We have randomize, and let's bring the dissolve width up quite high so we can see what's going on here. A lot higher than I would have it, and hit render out on that. With randomize, it's going to add basically just a bit of noise going on in there to sort of just break things up a little bit, so we don't get that uniform masked out look to it. Let's turn this up really high so you can see really what's happening there. It's just sort of randomizing all of that and really kind of creating a good solid bit of noise going on in there. Take a width down to 5. Might be enough just to break up that stuff there. In this case we have highly compressed footage, so so this works out really quite well. So we take it without the gamma correction, and you're not going to be able to see the difference. Cool. The other thing we've got here is blend. Again, let's turn this up really high. Yeah, and this puts a bit of a dissolve on over there. And if we have this turned up too high, you may actually see the foreground coming back in again. So you can see what's happening there. Check it out, dissolving that up, sort of blending that back in a bit more. For this type of footage, this sort of noisy type of footage, actually randomize works a little bit better just to break up those clean areas, and it looks absolutely fine. Let's just render out another couple of frames there, just so we can see if it's working across the frames, and it seems to. That's the end of the first little look at remove. So we've taken out the lens flare, we've taken out the man here. Let's take a look at our original. And then we have our after. So we have our before and our after. And we've done that fairly straightforwardly without too much hassle at all. So in the next clip, we're going to start filling in some of the features that we didn't look at before. So we're going to start with a simple clean plate remove. In our final example for remove, for now, we're going to sort of bring in some of the more advanced techniques and how we can start using multiple clean plates. All right, I'll see you in the next exercise.